Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are well. I'm sick of saying this, but what the hell of a week we've had. Another one where it's all going and there's so much to talk about, and the clock's always beating us, so I'm not going to hang about. Let's get the troops in right away. Let's start now over there in Edinburgh with our Lloyd. Lloyd, how are you?
I'm well, Roddy. Interesting week. Let's press on.
Oh, absolutely, isn't it? And of course, up there in Clackmannanshire, we have our favourite lawyer. Eva, how are you?
Hi, Roddy. Oh, I've had a fantastic day. After work, I was in the greenhouse in the garden, and I realised that we're living in the new days of a better nation because it was 20 degrees in Clackmannanshire, and apparently independence is inevitable.
There you go. Well, I don't want any innuendo here about that because I spent all afternoon with a dentist in my mouth very sore. I don't want any dirty comments. So I shouldn't probably introduce our next guest, Mr. Boswell. The Coatbridge Cavalier is here himself. How are you, Mr. Boswell? You decided to turn up this week, have you?
Aye. There wasn't any good people to hang about and get drunk with, so I thought, no. It was just one of these things. It's been hectic. And Edinburgh Airport, so the flight back from Brussels just dumps in here just before Prism kicks off, so handy. So I'm heading. My folks are in a barbecue. My family are having a barbecue around the back in Coatbridge, would you believe, which is magic. So I'll go there after this, after a couple of warm-ups, of course.
Quite right, of course you would. And of course we have, I was going to say a mystery guest or a guest that's a mystery. It's a bit of a both. It's none other than the old Paisley Mohawk, or as we call them now, is it the Miami Marauder?
No, the Tampa Buccaneer.
I knew it was something like that, some kind of Buccaneer. Right, Buccaneer, if you ask me. How are you, big man?
I'm fine, thanks. I'm enjoying the good weather. Not get much of it left because I'm coming home to Scotland next week. So I'll be back home in Scotland on Thursday.
If you don't like the weather, hang about for 20 minutes, mate. You know the story.
That's it. Well, I promised I would go home for summer, but nobody's told me what day it is yet. Yeah,
indeed. I tell you, I'd like to start, if I may, today. I mean, there's so much to get through, folks, but if I could start with you, Phil, because you obviously come from a very posh area. Because you've another, your second peer or dame. What do they call them? I don't know what they call a female lord these days. Is it a dame?
Another Fanny.
There's Aisha Hazarika. No, that's not her. What are you doing, Techie? That's what's that? Aisha Hazarika, who said in 2020, and I quote, don't know about you guys, but I've really had it with these unelected bureaucrats lording over us, thinking they know best. And she only changed her mind and became one herself. Bit of a hypocrite, eh?
Oh, 100%. Of course she's a hypocrite. She's Labour, Tory, same arse, different cheek. But they're almost identical now. There is absolutely no difference. You can't put that credit card, as we talk about, between them and their policies. So, yeah, she's turned round and taken the glory. A clever woman, very capable. Born in Bellshill, probably the maternity. Grew up in Coatbridge. But like the other parasite, Helen Liddell, Baroness of Coatdyke, it's a joke, but it's a serious joke because we're paying for it, and these clowns are just swanning about and sunning themselves in London and looking and doing what their master's bidding. And I don't remember ever seeing a castle in Coatdyke or anywhere else in Coatbridge for that matter. Maybe I'm missing something, but what the hell have we got a baroness for? I mean, what's the point, It's like, it's back to that. I know we've got two of them. I don't know what they're going to, at least Baroness Liddell's got a croquet partner. I don't know what the hell she's going to do that in Coatbridge, but she'll probably just ruin a bowling green. But anyway, never mind. Another waste of time. Other total chancer. Sold out. This is pathetic.
Yeah, I can honestly say, in Barhead, we don't have one of them. I'm glad if we ever get one, there'll be a riot. But while we're on, I mean, it's all innovation, all these new things, folks. Now, you've heard this thing about buy me a coffee. People politely say you can buy me a coffee and you make a small donation. Well, this being Prism and this being me, we take and come up with something a wee bit different. So what you can do for me is stick it up Kecky, you can buy me a gin, so get your phone out. Hit the old code and buy me a gin. What do you think of that, eh? That's what to do, folks. Help us fund this show and keep it going on the road. What do you think, Ian? I'll get anyone buying me a gin?
I don't hear any clicks in the background. So
unless it's a gun.
Stick that's right, Phil. Might be a gun. Stick with the water.
Up. Anyway, if I could start with you, Ian, on the serious stuff. Not that buying me a gin is not a serious thing, but last week we were all a wee bit excited when Prism finished because we knew there was going to be a challenge for the leadership of the SNP. We'd got wind, I've got to say, my dear friend, from you, that there was going to be a challenge and we would get a debate, and we hoped that it would, burst a few boils and get things moving. But it turned into to be a bit of a damp squib, did it not?
It certainly did. I was hugely disappointed. That was my first feeling, because, he managed to get, I can exclusively reveal, he got way over the 100 nominations he needed. And it wasn't from 20 branches, it was from 40 branches. So there was widespread demand for that election. But as we all know, he got a phone call from a mysterious senior figure in the party who he has yet to name, but they set up a meeting with John Swinneys the next day on the Sunday, and he seemed to have enjoyed himself. He said John Swinneys had been enormously generous with his time. There was a remarkable agreement over the thorny issues, none of which he's explained to us as yet. And then we got the absolute classic statement from him where he said that he got lots of advice from people who were no longer members of the Scottish National Party. He just wished they'd stayed within the party and had a voice and a vote. And he actually put that in the statement as he was announcing that he was cutting off every single member's voice and a vote in the SNP. And the fact that you couldn't relate the two of them and put them in the same paragraph, tells me he was all over the place. I mean, I've always had a sort of soft spot for him, because I think his annual ground rent campaigning has been good, and it's a viable idea. I mean, they use it, for instance, in Estonia to finance local government. So, I mean, it's a practical idea as well. Mm-hmm. I've tried to tell him repeatedly that his chances of getting this through when Nicola's busy appointing, the Duke of Buccleuch's factor and others to our economic advisory committee is, shooting blanks. It's never going to happen. But he seems to think, and he claims now that he's going to have, or John Swinneys, going to have a proper examination of it. I know he never made it public, but I know he met a Scottish minister about 2 years ago who agreed to listen to his case. And he made his case and it was rejected. So I don't think anything will change. But he was bought off cheap, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I heard the Scottish minister he met was the Reverend I Am Jolly. That could just be a rumour. But no, I mean, the annual ground rent, I actually interviewed him on here, as you probably remember. And I was really impressed by it. And I then took a motion to Alapa Conference, which was passed by the Alapa Party. To make it party policy, because it's a great thing. But it's a worry. Lloyd, I don't know, you say bought off, naive, or was he a deer in the headlights maybe when the realisation of where he'd put himself and he just maybe lost confidence to continue?
I don't know the man, but what I do know is he effectively has made himself the Grand Old Duke of York. He took everybody up to the top of the hill and marched them down again. It's not good enough. It's just not good enough. And I think this gets to the heart of certain problems that are right at the middle of the Scottish National Party. There are lots of people with their little bees in their bonnets about their own little ideas, and they think that's more important than independence. So the wishes and desires of the over probably 200 people who signed his nomination forms from 40 different branches of the party across Scotland were abandoned completely by this man. I don't know him, but it just stinks to me of typical middle-class Scot, somebody who he thinks is above him in the great pecking order, namely Mr. Swinney, or the unnamed senior party member, came along and paid him some attention, and that put a smile on his face, and he abandoned everybody else as a result of it. And I think it was Robert Bonteen Cunningham Graham who said that, no, the English are not our enemy. It is those of a small mind in Scotland that are our enemy. And I would suggest that this particular individual goes and has a damn good look in the mirror at himself.
Here. Eva, were you greatly disappointed when that debate that we all hoped for didn't take place?
Very much so, because I think it would have done the SNP and certainly Scotland the world of good to have had an open, honest hustings where questions would have been asked and I hope answered in a way that doesn't happen when you have a coronation as opposed to an election. But there could have been probably too much bruising instances for the SNP for them to ever have allowed there to be a proper contest. That's possibly why Kate Forbes didn't stand. It may be why Graham McCormick decided against it too, because we would have learned that the actual numbers of members in the party, we would have seen what enthusiasm there was or was not within the membership for various proposals, including the most controversial, which remains still on the table. So it was a disappointment, but it wasn't a surprise, because as soon as we knew that John Swinneys was going to stand, I think everybody here and most of the people in the know, or those who keep an eye on Scottish politics, expected a coronation. We didn't really expect a contest. We know that John Swinneys is continuity man yet again. And we also know that it's likely that one of the people with her hand up his back operating him is Nicola Sturgeon. That's been pretty clear over the course of the last few days, particularly Nicola Sturgeon, John Swinneys and Humza Yousaf having a tete-a-tete in chamber at the Scottish Parliament. So it's same old business as usual, and pretty sad for the party, but particularly for the country. It could have been a fresh start. It could have been a route towards collapsing the Scottish Parliament and having an early Holyrood election, which could have been about independence. There's so many things it could have been, should have been, would have been, and instead the men in grey suits or the men and women in grey kilts have had their day once more, and Scotland's the loser.
Absolutely. Phil, we've covered that, but the fact was that since John's come in, he said, in his acceptance speech, I'm so delighted to be elected. Well, you weren't really elected, mate. You're the coronation. But he said one of the things he said is he's going to stick with Humza's independence plan. Now, I might be showing my ignorance here. I'm not sure what that is really, because it keeps changing. And Humza kept changing it. So, I mean, there's someone from the SNP. Can you help me out here? What is the latest plan?
Nobody knows is the answer to that one, because there really isn't one. What the plan is they put independence, or they will put independence. The word will be mentioned because they've been critiqued so much, and they've been exposed. The divisions in the SNP, the sellout, the betrayal has been so well exposed by so many in Scotland that the numbers that we regularly see in decline of the differential between 53% for Indy and the 28%, what the hell it was, now down for the SNP. It's getting lower, and it's getting lower every day. What they're trying to desperately do now is pretend that there's a healing function going on here, and we'll probably talk about that later. That's probably why Kate's in. But John is same old. Normal imperialist services continue. Nicola, Angus Robertson, Humza, and even Kate. It will continue, and certainly with John Swinneys. He's not been successful. Listen, I would say John was a pleasant enough guy to get on with, but really, what's he actually done for Indy any time since I've known him? Very little. I thought when the 56 went down, I met him face to face for the first time in a meeting before we all took up office, and I really expected wonderful things from these wise sages of the party who were supposed to know exactly how the script was going to unfold, and very quickly it became clear to me they had no idea what they were doing, and sadly what's become even more patently obvious is the fact that they lack the ambition and they have sold us out, and that's the bit that sickens me most. That's why we won't be silenced. That's why we continue to fight, and it's why they will do as they're told, and we will rip them down. They have to be ripped down.
I mean, I don't know. When I think of John Swinneys, I think about the interview I had with Eileen Yona, and when I think of John Swinneys, I think of a tub of Nutella and a banana. But I'll leave it at that. Ian, one of the things when he did his acceptance speech, he was very, going around shaking people's hands. It was obvious the one person whose hands he didn't shake was Ash Regan, which I don't know if it was being petty or whether it was cowardice that he would upset the wokes. What do you think?
Well, he's maybe got an aversion for people that vote for him, because she was the only one of the opposition that actually voted for him and for him to be First Minister. I don't know. He probably knew what happened to Humza when Humza even, had the slight thought he might do a deal with Alba, and of course was removed by one of his spads phoning the Times and selling them down the river overnight. So he's probably worried about that and been seen to be publicly acknowledging that Alba exists. But it's a very, very sort of weak position to have. I mean, John's not going to be able to sell this message that everything's changed, and the light. I mean, there's the Greens today, the front page of the Herald, warning that's the headline: Greens warn Swinney over GRR. Who do these folk think they are? How much of a mistake was it for Sturgeon to insist in this SNP 1 and 2? There could be a supermajority in this Parliament that wouldn't be worrying about anything.
Correct.
An independence would have been on the front foot from day one. Instead, she wanted to play her brand of petty, selfish politics, trying to make sure there was nobody else could claim the mantle of being the party of independence. And that mantle's now well claimed by everybody else anyway, because of what she did. But I mean, it was such a destructive move to the independence movement. It was totally and utterly selfish, and she should be ashamed of it, as should all the people in the SNP who took to her defence and telling everybody it's the only way to go. So you ended up with all these wasted votes. You put loads of unionists into the Parliament who should not have been anywhere close, and now you're paying the price for it because you're a minority administration and the Greens are pulling your tail. The only difference now, I suppose, is they're not getting paid to do it.
Yeah, 32 unionists getting it. There could have been 32 independentistas. That was the thing, Lloyd. John had the chance to do all sorts of things, to reach out, as he said he was going to reach out. He could have phoned up Colette Walker, he could have phoned up Alec, he could have pulled it together. But instead, he's more worried about AIM, one of the most destructive groupings in the SNP up in Aberdeen. The Aberdeen and up at there in Aberdeen, they are woke central. They have caused division. They're the one that come up with the code. You weren't allowed to campaign for independence unless you passed their test of code. He could have, in his honeymoon time with the Greens at the way, get rid of the GRR bill, get rid of the hate crime bill. That would have been a good sign. Never a chance of that. It is business as usual.
Yes, it is. But I mean, I agree with you, Roddy. You could have done all those things. But who are we talking about here? We're talking about the leader of the Scottish National Party, the premier electoral manifestation of the will of the independent supporting people of Scotland. He knew when he got up to make his acceptance speech that independence is at 50% and above and has been for a while, and that his own party's fortunes are around about the 30s. I think someone who had independence at their heart would have used that platform and that place, particularly given he'd already said that he was going to be the First Minister for everyone and he was going to bring all the people together. Well, his first thing should have been to pull together the people of independence and said very clearly in his speech that he was going to administer for independence. If he recognises that there's a 20% difference between support for the Scottish National Party and support for independence, then the way to galvanise the whole movement to restore the fortunes of his party would have been to stand up and say, I will be the First Minister that will begin the negotiations. But he doesn't have it in him. That's the simple fact of the matter. John does not have that in him. It concerns me. John's going to try and triangulate this government with the Tories. And some of the rumours I've heard over the past few months about meetings between Kate Forbes and Andrew Bowie now all begin to make a bit sense. Because you remember when I was in the Scottish Parliament, initially Alec was the leader, and then John defeated Alex Neil to become the leader in the second year of the Parliament. So I've witnessed John's leadership style. I've seen John at work. And the fact that he didn't go and shake the hands of Ash Regan is exactly the petty little man that John is. He would not do that because someone might say something not nice to him. And John avoids these issues at all times. He is a silent assassin. That's all there is to it. And the fact that the way that he treated Margot MacDonald, the way he treated Campbell Martin, the way he treated Dr. Bill Wilson, the way he treated Dorothy Grace Elder, and to a much, much lesser extent myself, but those last three named were all known to John as his bastards. That's what goes on in John's mind. He's a weak individual, and he will brook no challenge whatsoever, and he'll use his minions to deal with any challenge, as he has done throughout all his time in the party. I think, you know, as I've said before, this is Groundhog Day, you know. It's back to the future. It's deja vu. We've been here. We were here 20 years ago. John made a mess of it. Anyone who believes he's not going to make a further mess of it this time round is simply foolish.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The one thing that's come out this week, Eva, is that when questioned, the GRA bill is not going away. They've got just sitting there waiting to bring it back in again. And the hope, it would seem, is that they hope that the Labour Party is going to come in, Sir Keir Starmer. I have to keep saying that, Labour Party, Sir Keir, amazing. And he will lift the Section 35 and they can get the whole thing that they want. Am I being cynical, or is that just what they're up to?
No. When John Swinneys was interviewed, I think it was in Sky News, where he was asked specifically very, very probing, forceful questions about gender recognition reform. And he repeatedly said it's not possible to implement it because of the Section 35. I think he also made a mistake in referring to the Supreme Court. The Section 35 had nothing to do with the Supreme Court. It was an application by the Scottish Government to the Court of Session in Edinburgh, asking them to establish whether the Section 35 order laid by Westminster was lawful or otherwise, and the Court of Session decided it was lawful. That brought the implementation of the gender recognition reform legislation to a halt. The Scottish Government could have appealed from the Court of Session to the Supreme Court. They chose not to do that. And what that means is that the bill, or as yet unimplemented act, remains on the statute book. And what I always say to people in my profession when I'm going into court or I'm preparing for court is, don't listen to what you think people say, listen to the words they actually use. Don't assume a summary. Don't take away your own views or your own thoughts. Think about the precise vocabulary and the terminology that was deployed. And the terminology and the vocabulary is very, very carefully deployed by somebody who's a skilled operator like John Swinneys, because he did not say that the gender recognition legislation will be binned. He said it simply cannot be implemented just now because Westminster has forbidden that. If the Scottish Government and the SNP in particular had decided to follow popular opinion and the current law, they would get rid of the legislation completely. It would be removed from the statute book where it's presently languishing. But it remains there, and it remains there because it's a ransom and it's an offer, and it's absolutely against the popular will of the country. It's against the interests of most of the women in the country who are very much against it. And the issue is not simply the question of self-identification. The issue is that right through the Scottish Government, when it was led by Nicola Sturgeon and Humza Yousaf, and unfortunately it looks like it's going to be the same way with John Swinneys, a gender recognition certificate would be considered by the government as changing your sex for all intents and purposes. And that's the error, that's the flaw, that's the fundamental difficulty with this legislation, and it's what ought not to be happening. So unfortunately, we've got more of the same. He is continuity man. And what you'll see is John Swinney will be brought down in exactly the same way as both of his predecessors were, if that's what the Greens and others similarly minded want to do. What he should do, if he's a real leader, is he should not be appeasing the Greens or out for Indy, who he's apparently going to have a meeting with, and waiting for his broom cupboard video like Nicola Sturgeon did. He shouldn't be appeasing them. He should be thinking in a very determined fashion about what Scotland needs, not what small, insignificant factions demand when they're having tantrums, because that's what they are. That's Patrick Harvey had a tantrum on more than one occasion last week. It's appalling for somebody in that position, elected to do a job that he's signally incapable of doing in any kind of sensible, responsible manner. So instead of appeasing and giving in to the tantrums, because you wouldn't do that with a toddler, what you would do is you would be very firm and very determined about what your own objectives should be for the country. And the number one objective should be attaining independence and uniting the movement. Gender recognition reform, conversion therapy, and all the madcap policies of the Greens should be scrapped for the term of this Parliament, and we should get on with the job of winning our country's independence.
Absolutely, here. And on that, Phil, when the new cabinet was announced, they did away with one position. And the one position they did away with was the Minister for Independence. Am I being cynical, or was that just sort of sum it all up?
No, it absolutely nails it. I mean, they will drag it out again when they have to. They'll drag out and they'll use the verbiage. They'll come out with glib sound bites. This is often the case in politics. And what we'll see is they'll just mouth service to independence, but you won't see any action. And really, I don't know about anybody else, but I didn't see any action towards practical independence from the previous Minister for Independence. It was an ego massage, a ticky box, a wee present for being a good boy and doing what you're told, son. And that's how it's continuing. There is absolutely no change here, and it sickens me. And why people aren't catting on to this? It goes beyond belief. You know, when you look at how it's coming back, these policies that are being followed, you know, the free ports, the back into the EU, all that kind of shit, everything we've talked about so far, these are all from a unionist pen, designed to continue the submission of Scotland to the usury practices of the right-wing neocons who currently run both America and Britain, the whole of the West. In fact, it's the same people. You know, the lobbyists, the City of London, Wall Street, Big Pharma, the military-industrial complex, big food corporations, hedge funds, insurance. That's who runs Britain and America. Now, they're not really that bothered about Scotland, but they don't want the deconstruction of the United Kingdom. That's why they're geared up against it, because this is a wee launching pad and a flag-waving exercise that still has some credibility, God knows why, around the world. And obviously the listening bases that we've got from potential Russian missile attacks to eastern United States also come in quite handy. And then there's the North Atlantic gap, which is obviously an issue. But no, the agents of these bodies that control the West now pull the strings with the succession of marionettes, effectively, that pose as leaders of the Scottish people. Not one of these. Think about it, get people. Look what many have sacrificed, and sadly so many will never see it. But no one, Nicola, Humza, Swinney, or Kate Forbes or Angus Robertson or any of these people would I follow into battle for the freedom for our people in our country. Not one of these shysters. So we're still awaiting the big clear out in the SNP, and sadly, I believe that can only happen when they're crushed in the next election in Scotland.
Yeah, I agree. Techie, could you stick up the picture of Kate Forbes arriving to be made? Now, I love this picture, Ian, because she's wearing a green dress and she's waving bye-bye. Is she waving bye-bye to the Green Party? I think it's a lovely bit of trolling. But the question I want to ask you, Ian, is she's been made the Deputy First Minister, which is really not, I mean, it's I don't know, it's just a title. But she's also been made the Cabinet Secretary for the Economy, while Shona Robinson's been retained as the Cabinet Secretary for Finance. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but how can you be in charge of the economy if you're not in charge of the finance? It's not as if we are even, and why we're here, we're not even a nation. They're playing with pocket money. You can't have two people doing the one job, can you?
Well, the other thing is you've got to ask who actually does that job. I mean, the Scottish Parliament's got zilch to do with running Scotland's economy. All the powers of running an economy are kept south of the border, you know. So, you know, you can have all the titles you like. In terms of actual power to change anything, you don't have it at all. That was quite funny. She wore the green dress, you know, because I would like to think that was deliberately provocative, because I think that her treatment from the Greens since she was announced has been quite shocking. And, you know, I think it does the Greens no favour. I'm quite happy they're doing it because they're turning voters off. People don't like to see that sort of, you know, vitriol, and that's the only way you can describe it, objecting to our religion and all the rest of it. I don't think it's a clever thing to do politically. I also don't think, you know, if you're John Swinneys and you're trying to claim that you're going to change things, adding only Kate Forbes to your cabinet, one person, and leaving all that these deadbeats in the jobs they were previously doing, it gives the impression that he's probably just there a short term to hold the fort in the hope that by some miracle the Murrows got over all their court cases and arrests and all the rest of it, and Nicola can make a triumphant return because he's made such a mess of being the First Minister. I wouldn't put that past Nicola. It's quite clear throughout Holmes this time, it wasn't Holmes that was running the government, it was Nicola that was doing it. And I don't think it's changed with it being John Swinneys. He's what I'd describe as a low-cost political casualty. You know, useful, temporary, stick him in there. If he gets shot, it's no loss, you know. But he can hold the fort for a wee bit of time to give us, in the background, time to reorganise. But, I mean, it's, the SNP are in a most hellish mess, and they've shown that no desire themselves to get out of it. They're perpetuating it. Everyone that knows anything about politics that's looking on can see exactly the mistakes they're making. You know, and they've got this absolute, I know they've got rid of them from government, but it's pretty clear looking at the figures, they're going to hope to rely on Green votes. And if they're relying on Green votes, they're going to get played daily, you know, by the Greens. No question. You know, so we'll see what happens, but I've got absolutely no hope for the SNP. I think they're a busted flush.
I'm tending to agree with you. Well, I did give them some information this week that could lead to the revival, but I don't think they'll take it. Far too sensible for them. Lloyd, do you think John Swinneys short-term or a long-term man in place?
I think it's difficult to tell. I mean, if you're in the world of real politics, then he's short term. But this whole situation, and it's been alluded to by others, is in the fog of what has happened over the past 9 years, and very specifically the charges against Alex Salmond and indeed the outstanding court cases. Now, you were getting no change in the central cabinet for that reason. There are a bunch of people who know stuff, and it's very important that those people are looked after, kept together in their little group, and adding Kate to it, that's okay. The one that surprised me was the dumping of Joe Fitzpatrick and Emma Roddick particularly, because they've been central to maintaining this attitude towards Alex Salmond. I think John is the caretaker, but how long are you the caretaker? I mean, in my mind, every single leader of the Scottish National Party is the caretaker until we pull the lanyard on the saltire outside the United Nations building in New York. You know, you can't be anything else other than the caretaker in real terms unless you've delivered independence. And John ain't going to do that, so he's the caretaker. How long will he last? Will depend entirely on how well John has got his ducks aligned with his friends within the Conservative and Unionist Party, and how many biscuits he can drop to the Liberal Democrats. Because don't be fooled by, John's not making moves against the Greens. Who do you think it was that got Humza to carry out the assassination? Let's get real about this. So that John didn't have to do it himself, they fitted Humza up to get him to do it, which meant they could then use the Greens' anger to get rid of Humza and put John in. John will now, as he's equivocating on the GRRB, which is driving an awful lot of the more woke members of the SNP insane and the Greens insane. But in reality, it can't be moved on. John, as I said right at the beginning, John will naturally move to those who will support right-wing policies. Every statement he's made on the economy since he was in the frame, never mind immediately after becoming sworn in as the First Minister, is we're living in economically straitened times. We're on a limited budget. He hasn't used the cuts word yet, but he's indicating at every single sentence that cuts are coming. Now, the only way he's only going to be able to get away with that is if he gets the Tories on board. And again, I go back to, why has Kate Forbes been, when she was no longer a minister, why has she been meeting with Andrew Bowie over the past year? Exactly what's going on. I mean, we know from John's previous tenure that the alliances he tried to build were always from the right politically. That's the world that John occupies. So I can see him lasting as long as the British are quite happy, because they've already got, as Deputy First Minister, the replacements already there to take over. What we've had last year was Jenny Gilruth, by proxy, Kezia Dugdale, Humza Yousaf running the government on behalf of the International Voluntary Leaders Programme of the United States. And now we have two alumni of the British-American Partnership, our First Minister and Deputy First Minister. So the Brits are back in charge. That's really what's happened. That's the only change.
Oh, lovely. Cheer me up. Cheer the audience up. Nothing like it. As we've alluded to, Eva, the Greens are getting a wee bit upset. Oh, shame. It really is. Breaking my wee heart. They're getting really wound up. Now, what the wee dwarfy guy Harvey come out with is that we've got rid of progressives, getting rid of him and his pal Slater and Emma Ruddock and Joe Fitzpatrick. Progressives don't mean the same as when I was younger. But they've suggested, you love this is a softball right to you. Apparently kick for you, Eva. We're going back to the 1950s to a regressive time. What do you make of that?
I would love to debate Patrick Harvey face to face, eyeball to eyeball on that.
I would sell tickets.
That challenge to him right now. I previously issued that challenge to Jamie Hepburn, and look what's happened to him. So he's hoping that I can continue in my fine form. In the 1950s, women in Scotland didn't have women's aid refuges to go to for solace. They would struggle to find state benefits to survive on had they to separate from a violent husband. There were no rape crisis centres for them. They would struggle to get their name on a rent book. They certainly wouldn't get a mortgage. That was the 1950s for you. If you fast forward, rape within marriage only became criminalised in Scotland in 1982, round about the same time that women's aid refuges and rape crisis services were becoming more prevalent and available for women who needed them at the time of need. So from Patrick Harvey's perspective, the person that's driving women's rights and women's services back in time, way beyond the 1950s, back in fact to before the days of Elizabeth Fry, is Patrick Harvey, ably assisted by those nutcases in the SNP, especially those in Out for India and the like, who think that you can actually change your sex. So Patrick Harvey needs a history lesson, he needs lessons in humanity, and he needs to learn and understand the struggle that women had for equality. And it is a struggle and a fight that women, particularly in Scotland, will never give up, and we will not lose. We've not lost so far, and we intend one day, figuratively, to wipe the floor with Patrick Harvey in the fashion in which the floor has been wiped with him this week.
Yeah, it is what we want to see, and we hear. Well, the SNP had a party political broadcast this week, Phil, and in it we had blah blah Blackford as one of the participants, and they were talking about, we're going to have the free ports, and we're going to get back into the EU. And what they didn't mention was they also intend, as we sit today, to use the pound sterling. Now, as Ian will tell us probably in the next series of questions, you don't get back into the EU if you've got free ports. You don't get into the EU if you've got the pound sterling, someone else's currency. But they keep spreading this one. Oh, the only way to get back in is to vote for us.
Yeah, probably I went off too early earlier on when I was talking about who's actually in control and who's actually writing these policies. They're dictated to the SNP puppets, and they've put them in place because none of these philosophies will work. You cannot, exactly as you say, you will not be permitted. What we want is EFTA, because quite frankly, until the European Union starts behaving itself and acting like a civilised body, I believe in the European dream and the unification of countries towards a peaceful goal and working together to create, because it's a tough old world out there, and economic unions make things better for the participants. So we really should be looking at that. But under the current circumstances where the European Union is a warmonger at the behest of its masters, no, we don't want any of that either. The pound, nonsense. We need rid of that one. We'll have our own currency, no doubt. And back into the EU, EFTA, as we say. And on something that Eva talked about, the Greens comments taking us back to the 50s. Just remember how bad it was, and that's where we're heading again. We're heading there right now unless we take control of our country and get rid of these neocons, these people who practice usury, and all they're doing is taking what resources we have, and there's plenty left. There's still plenty more they can rape and pillage, because the poor conditions, the living conditions, the unemployment, the substandard housing, the health issues, that was by definition the national character of Scotland in the 50s. And Glasgow, Glasgow in particular was hell. And when you look even further back, the 30s and up to all the negative stereotypes came out round about then, and we've continued to try to fight that, and it is the wonderful place that it is now. But by God, we're regressing. So they have a point that was hellish, but to be honest, a big part of that is the idiot policies and these impractical policies that the Greens are putting in place. It's glib sound bites. They do not have green. If you put it in front of something, people feel guilty, or made to feel guilty about just breathing air. You put green in front, it's a marketing term. It's a brilliant marketing term, but that's about all it is. So no, why we're even listening to these clowns, I don't know. I certainly don't. I think they're idiots, and they've got no right to be in government.
I think they'll pay a heavy price come the Holyrood election, because they won't get a lot of these SNP second votes. Ian, you and Salvo Liberation guys have done a lot of work on free ports. Do you not find it infuriating when you're watching them talking about these free ports and about going back into the EU, when you know from your research that that's just not possible?
Well, exactly. And I mean, it's just another normal lie and a normal lying day for the Scottish government. I mean, it really is. They're trying to pull the wool over everybody's eyes. Free ports are a disaster area. It's an absolute embarrassment to Scotland that there's not a single party speaking out in this. And thank goodness for Salvo Liberation, who are very active in this issue. We're going to be more active, because I suppose I should mention, given that it's in my blog just recently, that the Liberation elections are going to be taking place. And we're going to have a wide range of candidates, far more candidates than we need. But what we're going to do very sort of democratically, we're going to film each candidate, and we're going to put together a programme which will last maybe about an hour and a half or so, with these candidates explaining who they are, why they're members of Liberation, what their experience is, and why they think they should be elected to the committee. And what we're doing is proving to outside bodies that we have a democratic structure. There'll be over 100,000 people, there'll be over 10,000 people voting with 10 votes each. And we will be able to demonstrate to the UN and others that we have a proper structure in place that's capable of supporting the growth that we'll experience once our recruitment campaigns start later on this summer. Because we plan, for instance, to leaflet every football match in Scotland, calling for people to sign up. And we're looking at what Sinn Féin did in Ireland and how they recruited and became a very powerful force. So we're having a look at that as well. So I just thought I'd throw that name in just to put the fear of God into the security services.
What you mean? No coronation? I can't make a phone call and get people to stand down.
No,
That's what kind of election do you call that?
That's it. Graham McCormick will not be allowed to intervene.
All right, and there'll be no cancelling the election, having another one if you don't like the result. None of that either.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's a democratic organisation.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that's one of the things the whips use. Filming candidates is something the Tories have done for years, and it keeps their MPs in line. Yeah, I think it's different filming you're talking about, isn't it?
Hopefully so, although we might get more viewers.
Well, there is that. It's worth a shot. Techie, I want you to stick up Ian Murray. He's an Edinburgh MP after all. I'm going to ask our Edinburgh guest here a question about the comments of the Edinburgh MP. Mr. Murray.
I think here in terms of whether or not someone should have a referendum, if we just think back to David Cameron back in 2013, he didn't really want a EU referendum, but he bet the entire farm on an EU referendum and lost. And therefore, if we disagree with the ends, let's not facilitate the means when we're principally against it.
There you go. What he's effectively saying is, we don't like it in case because we think they'll vote yes, so we're just never going to let them vote yes. And yet there's still some in the SNP, Lloyd, who think they can do a deal with these bastards.
Yeah, but those are the devolutionists. These are the people who support the union. You know, this is the slowly emerging story. Is, you know, where do Ian Murray and John Swinneys come together? God save the king. That's about the size of it. No, I mean, look at it from Ian Murray's point of view. A deeply untalented little man with a terrible, horrible, nasty streak about him. Clearly was bullied at school. Doesn't like folk as a general rule. That's why he's a Hearts fan. And the only way he can keep his seat, he gets the seat on unionist votes. That's it. Ian Murray is a one-man party in Scotland, and he can sound off all the stuff he wants because Keir Starmer will say to him, "That's fine, Ian, you just keep going." And he knows that he is secure, absolutely secure in that position. So he will say everything he says is about the maintenance of the union, supposedly. It's not. It's about maintaining Ian Murray's job because he knows, unlike the Labour Party he joined way back when it's over for you in the Labour Party these days, when you lose your seat, that's you. You're done. He might make it to the House of Lords, maybe, and I think he'd quite like that. Hearts fans usually do. Come on down, George Fuchs. Ian Murray's just a pest. He's just a horrible pest. I would really like a genuine unionist to stand against Ian Murray. Now, that would throw the cat among the pigeons. You know, why doesn't the Tory party stick somebody up against them? I mean, a real candidate, no a cardboard cutout like they've done the past 3 elections. Put somebody real up against them. I'd love the unionist equivalent of George Galloway. Or is George Galloway the unionist equivalent? I don't know. But we need somebody to stand in Edinburgh South against Murray on a unionist ticket. And then maybe an independence supporting candidate might have a chance of coming through. But until then, you know, even in this city, Ian Murray is a joke. He's an absolute joke to the people of the city. And the reason for that is because he changes his mind about everything apart from keeping his own job practically on a day-to-day basis. He's a fool.
And for those viewers who didn't know that Lloyd is a hippie, you now know he's a hippie. No need to guess anymore. But Eva, it's just typical of the unionists and Labour in particular, and all that's going on all this time. And that's why Section 30s and all the other nonsense is not worth it. They're not Democrats. They're absolutely not democratic.
My dad was a hippie. I think it rubbed off on me. No, they're not Democrats. Of course they're not. If they were, we would have had another referendum a while ago. The reality, though, is that the leadership of the SNP are not Democrats either. Because if they were, they would have, as we alluded to so many times before, they would have had the Holyrood election by now as a de facto referendum, because they would have collapsed Holyrood and done that and fought for independence within Scotland. If the SNP were Democrats, they would also have done a Scotland United campaign for the general election. There's still time to do it, but no indications that they will. So what will happen instead is that if everybody sits and twiddles their thumbs and lets them get away with it, you'll see a carve up between Labour and the SNP after the general election. You'll see the implementation, I would imagine, as we said earlier, of the gender recognition legislation. You'll probably see the implementation in due course of conversion therapy legislation, and the independence movement will continue to be split by policies that are unpopular and ill-advised, and you'll see the full horror of what those mean unfold over the course of the next few years, though obviously it was alluded to in the Holyrood debate earlier this week when Murdo Fraser in particular spoke about a young woman who was a detransitioner. Scotland has found itself in some dreadful places in the last few years, and life will only get a lot harder for far too many people if we continue to allow ourselves to be governed by clowns and fools. And an interesting statistic this week actually was there was a by-election in Kilwinning, and the Labour vote went up a few percent. The SNP vote went down, I think, 12%, and that should be a wake-up call. I think that's every by-election thus far in the course of the last couple of years. The SNP vote has dropped. It will continue to do because people know that they're not being given responsibility. All that has to be done to reintroduce competent government. John Swinneys had the chance this week to get rid of the make weights in the cabinet, whether it's senior or junior level. He's not done that, as we said. He's kept pretty well the same faces as before. The only new one is that Kate Forbes is in, a couple of Greens are out, and a couple of others who should never have been in the first place are out as well. So Scotland is not running democratically at the moment. It could do, but it won't. Continue to have in power the people that we have just now in opposition as well as in control.
Thanks, Eva. Techie, could you stick up your Kezia Dugdale? I want you to watch this film and listen to this. I think it's a video. I'm not sure if it's a video or a picture, actually. I don't remember now.
It was a picture.
It's a picture, is it? There it is. Kezia Dugdale. Labour may scrap tuition fees in Scotland. She's saying an incoming Labour government may do that. That's kind of, when she's saying that, it kind of makes it, that's exactly what's going to happen. And will it be the same again for prescription charges will be reintroduced, bridge tolls reintroduced, the end of free care for the elderly, the end of bus passes for the over 60s? Will they do away with all the real progressive policies that the SNP introduced under Alex Salmond?
Yes, is the short answer to that. And ironically, the idiot Greens don't see the fact that their discombobulation is bringing this crap on and taking us back to the 50s, because that's exactly where we're going to end up if we allow these fools to lead us. They're not leading us. They're sheepishly doing what they're told and getting very well rewarded for it, way above their abilities. Bear in mind, I've worked with some of these bozos, and you wouldn't hire them. I've said it before, I wouldn't hire them as my assistant's assistant, and I shudder to think that these clowns are they're actually not making decisions, they're just doing what they're told. But we do regress. You're right. Then what? The school, the university fees all go. Then prescription fees, bridge tolls, private health care suddenly kicks in, major style, and the NHS disappears. No returning of the transportation systems or the Royal Mail to the body of the kirk, which should be publicly owned, in a Scotland that reflects its values. And this has taken us all the way to the poorhouse, and sadly that's where more and more people will end up. And that That's the disgusting, disgraceful fact that a great many of those in power, the disenfranchised, have given up. They're too busy fighting for food for your kids, or getting some kind of advantage, or try to feed your wains, or trying to go on, trying to get a job that means you don't have to go to a food bank, to actually engage in politics. And those of us who have the luxury to do it, too many of us are comfortable enough and don't actually see what goes on. You have to be frontline. See if you're not frontline, see if you're not police, emergency services, if you're not social work, if you're not volunteering at a food bank, if you're not up there front and personal, you've got no idea what it's like. That week I wept every time I went to Chris's house. These wonderful people, frontline voluntary suicide charity, which is the last barrier before the abyss. And the tragedy that is where this nation, our wonderful country, and especially our wonderful people, are heading, comes down to the blind ignorance, willful ignorance, and blinded ignorance. And I use the word ignorance. I don't say unaware, because I used to say that when I was being polite, but it's ignorance, folk. And we have a duty to know what's going on here. Spread the word and make sure people realise the ramifications of letting half-wits like these ball bags run our country and be manipulated by those who would keep us on our knees.
Absolutely shocking. Earlier in the week, going back to almost one of our first topics, Ian, not only were the Greens bitching about things, but the Labour Party, Annis thought, well, I better get in this as well. He was accusing the SNP of moving to the right. They love to throw out that, we're all going to the right, we're on the left. Techie, going to stick up that picture you put right at the beginning, thinking it was a peer, which is an easy mistake to make, Tory Labour. This woman here, Elfric,
from Dover.
She was in the ERG group, the most right-wing part of the Tory party you can be in. She's an absolute extreme right, and she's welcomed into the Labour Party. It's unbelievable. Can you imagine in the days of, people like Nye Bevan, something like that happening? I mean, it's just incredible. You cannot separate them now, can you? I mean, in your previous life, you could have been comfortable in the Labour Party of today.
Oh, the Labour Party of today was well to the right of the Tory Party I was in the 80s. Yeah, under Ted Heath, I can tell you. No, but I mean, the sad fact of it is we've created this situation in Scotland, and the Scottish Parliament's responsible for a lot of it as well, because all these gender issues, as an example, are all being promoted by full-time paid employees whose money to be paid employees comes from grants from the Scottish Parliament into millions. And, the ordinary parent, is trying to fight back against this, but they've got all the responsibilities of holding down their own job, raising their kids. And here they're up against a full-time machine in terms of people publicly funded by the Scottish Parliament to project all these woke policies, which are a disaster. And we've been let down also, I think, a bit by the teaching unions. I understand how difficult it is for an individual school teacher to stand against the tide and say, this is wrong, this should not be happening. But surely through their union, the EIS and the other teaching unions, they could have fought back much better than they've done. So we've ended up with this situation where parents are losing control of their kids. And very few of these parents are going to look to John Swinneys to repair that damage, because if you think back in John Swinneys' record, he was the man behind the Named Children Act, which fortunately get kiboshed. But I mean, we really need to think about what we're doing in Scotland. What legislation do we not want to see? What legislation do we want to see? Then we need to show some interest, as has been said previously, in politics. Doesn't need to rule your life, but take an hour or two each week just to bring yourself up to date. It's full suggesting with what's going on. And then the chances of Scotland making better decisions will be greatly enhanced.
Absolutely. Techie, could you stick up that video from Simon Godston? Lloyd, cast your eyes over this one.
Nature of poverty has changed. So you talked about the late 70s, early 80s. The predictor of whether you were going to be poor in this country then was if you were old or if you were unemployed. Now, a majority of poor households do contain at least one worker because of the way that wages at the lower end, it's also been the case in the US, have fallen down relative to others. And I think it's striking, you know, we say we're a rich country, we're a G7 country, but the poorest fifth of the population are now much poorer here than most of the poorest countries in Central and Eastern Europe. So there is a big chunk of the population for whom that is not the case, that they do not live in a rich country. They actually would be better off, even as a poor household, they would be better off in quite poor countries in the European Union. So that's a growing issue which predates Brexit.
There you go. I mean, we know this. We talk about this every week. But now when you've got them talking about it, that's an ex-employee of the Tory party admitting it, Lloyd. That's another reason why we've got to get out of this union.
Absolutely, Roddy. You know, it is extraordinary when you have people who come from within that Tory party. But as Ian referred to earlier, you know, the difference between the Conservative and Unionist Party of today and the Conservative Unionist Party of, for instance, Ted Heath or Macmillan or any of those geezers that were around when I was but a nipper, it's a completely different thing. But the whole central point of British politics has shifted massively to the right. So hence you have a new Labour Party or a new Labour Party who effectively cover that position that was Edward Heath's One Nation Tories of 1970-71. That's where they're at. The Tories are much further over, and the SNP is kind of somewhere around Callaghan's Labour government of 75. But this is a lot to do with the fact that there's no proper discussion of political principle. What is your right? What do you believe in? You know, and you don't have to put a single label. It's not necessarily socialist or Tory or Marxist or cooperative or liberal or social democrat. Do you believe people should tell the truth? Do you believe people should get a fair crack at the whip? Do you believe people should live in a decent house? Do you think people should have a decent education? Do you think people should have access to health? Now, that's an ideology. The fact that woman, Elphick, can jump from the Tory party to the Labour Party seamlessly shows you that we are in the time of no ideology. The ideology has become get the job. And we've seen that in the Scottish National Party by people who are driven by their own personal ambition, but who have no politics, who move along like sheep, as they did over GRR and a number of other things, because they don't know what to believe in other than they want this status of being a member of Parliament. And it comes back to this whole thing which I've ranted on about numerous times. Politics has become a kind of adjunct to show business. And as a result of that, it attracts people who know they can't get anywhere in show business, so they do the next best thing. It's a bit like all those fake actors that ended up priests or ministers or teachers. I mean, and again as well, there is this whole thing of status. People think that once they're elected, that's it. They don't have to do anything else, and that's what we've got in the Scottish National Party, Scottish Government. All the hard work, or not hard work, the work that should have been done, that people should be driven to doing, of analysis, development of policy, has been left for 10 years in the hands of a bunch of English civil servants shipped up here whose job it is to protect devolution. So as a result of that, I would say very, very simply, we are at the end of devolution, and anyone in politics in Scotland who doesn't understand that is in the wrong game. Devolution is done. It can take us no further. We have to take the next step, but we require people who can come to that analysis. Devolution is dead.
Here. Eva, I know poverty issues are a big thing for you. That just confirms and reaffirms what we already know.
I want to follow on from what Lloyd was saying there about devolution has had its day. and to think about what's happening in Scotland today with some figures hot off the press. We learned this week that in the last year, Quangos in Scotland spent £67 million on public relations. 67 million quid. It's a disgrace. They shouldn't be spending a pound on public relations. And while that was going on, we know there were 30,000 homeless in Scotland, 1,200 drugs deaths at least, alcohol-related deaths are up. Children living in poverty is up. The numbers of working poor, as we've seen already, are up. And all of this comes back to the failure of government. We need leadership who will kick ass, take names and get the bloody job done. Less of the snowflake mentality, and the mentality that we need are the people that will roll up their sleeves and make sure that we get this country working again and we look after our people the way they should be looked after. No more lining the pockets of those who are already super rich. You can go to the universities, you can go to all the Quangos, you can go to all the organisations that are publicly funded and see people who are paid 200, 300, 400 grand a year for working a few hours a week, grossly overpaid, and everything's collapsing around about us because we continue to be governed, as I said before, by clowns and fools. The ordinary people are seeing this. It's why turnout at election is down, but it's also why, in the end, folk are going to turn more and more to others who have more radical ideas. And I hope in a Scottish context, it's to independence for independence. People like me and Sally and Derek and others who are coming forward who don't have any party allegiance, but will be answerable to the people who elect them and will do the job that they're elected to do.
Hear, hear. Well said. And I hope you're all listening. Indies for indie people. That's the future. It's the future. Now, last week, we've run out of time. We're running out of time here. Last week, we showed you a video which wasn't a comedy. It was a comedy. It wasn't meant to be. And it was one of Biden's top economic advisors who was asked to explain the money supply and couldn't. But here's two. I often say in life, everything is simple. It's people that make it difficult. But here's the reverse. Here's a lady who's taken what's been turned into a difficult, complex situation and makes it simple and actually shows up for its stupidity. Techie, stick up the lady milking the cow.
Which one of you's from the New York Times? You know there's only two genders, right? There's only two genders, and they know that in Iowa. I challenge the New York Times reporter and the Washington Post reporter to try to milk a cow and then try to milk a bull and see how that goes.
As I say, taking something that's been made difficult and showing it and how stupid it is. But here's one more that's even more stupid for you folks before we go. Techie, stick up this other video. Those of you, I hope
it's known that Ukraine itself has mixed views on this ideology. Why aren't we condemning Ukrainian manifestations of Nazism and continuing to sponsor it?
79 years ago, the United States and our Ukrainian allies joined forces to combat the oppressive regimes of Hitler and Stalin. While Berlin is now an ally, the threat from the East persists. That's why we're committed to standing by Ukraine and offering our full support in any way we can.
Just going to go to the spokesman for the President of the United States says that the US and Ukraine defeated Stalin and Hitler. And this is the spokesman for it's quite frightening, folks, what's going on in the world.
I can give you a better one than that. Over here, Joe Biden has just recently claimed that his uncle Bozo was eaten by cannibals. That's fact. That's now an official part of, I mean, he's been serious. He believes his uncle was eaten by cannibals. So that's now an official part of the presidential race.
I just suddenly realised, you and the people we have on here, we're suddenly, I don't think, as dysfunctional as I thought we were. We're actually pretty damn smart.
Absolutely. I spotted there was something wrong with that one, as did most of Americans.
I think what's deeply, deeply worrying about that's a senior member of the State Department who clearly has no concept whatsoever of what happened in the Second World War. It might come as a bit of a surprise to Heinrich Himmler to discover that his SS Ukrainian regiment was actually fighting on behalf of the Americans. And then again, those of us who know that they all got shipped over here to Caddington and Linlithgow at the end of the war, we know plenty about them. But this shows you what happens when politics becomes show business. You say it, therefore it's true, because it's all a script. And the fact that it's not true tomorrow doesn't matter, because it was a script. And it's pathetic how our journalists, so-called journalists, and some of the finest journalists in the world were in that room. Not one of them, apart from the Russians, actually got up and said anything about it. And that gives you the impression that maybe they're just as stupid as the people that are elected. But then again, the American education system, as it's proving to the world with its actions it's taking on its campuses at the moment, proves what it genuinely is. It's not in the business of education and uplifting their children. It's in the business of taking the money off them. And that's all it is. It's a monetization of children.
No, I think it's more than that. I think it's the fear of losing your job. That's what's stopping these people. We're not as stupid as we appear, and the ignorance of these individuals for not standing up for a very obvious lie is down to the fact that you go against the grain, you will be cut down. You stand up against the establishment, you will lose. They will take you down. And this is the whole thing.
Take away your White House pass for a start, and you'll not get back.
For starters, you get that, and you won't get any. You'll lose your job effectively. And this goes back to the whole Kate Forbes thing, the whole succession and waiting for Kate to come up. She is the FM in waiting, and it's more of the same. As I said, a slightly less better pill than her predecessors, but the same menu. Where's independence? It's an attempt to bring more to the party with a view that dissenting voices, this is what Swinney's trying to do. He brought her in and he tried to pretend that there's a coming together and the SNP is healing. News just in, it's no. It remains riven, and so does society, and particularly the West. And it's that classic, if you say nothing, your party to the corruption that's ongoing. For evil men to succeed, all good men and women need to do is say nothing and do nothing. And that's what it comes down to us. It's beholding to us as human beings and as people who give a shit, to actually stand up and call it like it is.
Here it is. Gentlemen, lady, Eva, Lloyd, Phil, Ian, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your repartee and wit. And folks, if you've enjoyed this... Halfway there to being a wit. Have you? Yeah. if you like these folks, remember, techies, stick it up. Buy me a gin instead of buy me a coffee. I love that slogan. Buy me a gin. Is that a bottle or just one? Well, I don't know. Techies set it up. I don't know. Where is it, Techie? Stick up the buy me a gin. Come on. Oh, there you go. Yeah, you've got the beard there. Buy me a gin. Get your phone on that, folks. Buy the wee gin. Right, so we see you again soon, ladies and gentlemen. Certainly this time next week I'll be back in sunny Spain. But I mean, that guy looks 10 years older than me, and I'm old as it is. Right, folks, you take care. We'll see you soon. God bless.
Good night.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.